It was supposed to be just another glamorous evening in Los Angeles. The charity gala was buzzing with energy, filled with A-list celebrities, politicians, and influencers rubbing shoulders under the sparkling chandeliers of a luxury hotel ballroom. Among them stood Candace Owens, looking every bit the confident commentator she had become known for being. Dressed in a sleek black gown, she smiled for photos and exchanged pleasantries with donors and fans alike. She was there not only as a guest but also as one of the featured speakers on stage later that night. Unbeknownst to her, fate had something else planned, something that would shake up her carefully curated public image. Across the room, Sylvester Stallone, the legendary actor whose larger-than-life persona had made him a household name, was surrounded by admirers. He was charming, charismatic, and effortlessly commanding attention wherever he went. Little did anyone know his presence at this event would soon collide with Candace's world in ways no one could have predicted. As the evening progressed, the host called both Candace and Stallone onto the stage for a live interview segment. The audience clapped enthusiastically as they took their seats side by side. The host began by asking Stallone about his latest projects and his enduring legacy in Hollywood. Stallone laughed good-naturedly, sharing stories from his early days making Rocky and how those experiences shaped him into the man he is today. But then, almost casually, the conversation shifted. The host asked Stallone if he ever encountered interesting people during his career, people who left an impression on him. Without hesitation, Stallone leaned forward, his signature gravelly voice filling the room. "You know," he said, "there was this guy I met back in the 80s when we were filming Rocky IV. He worked security on set, and we used to chat between takes. Real salt-of-the-earth kind of guy." Candace smiled politely, nodding along like everyone else in the audience. But her expression froze when Stallone added, "Funny thing is, he told me he had a niece who was really into writing. Said she wrote all these essays back in high school, you know, the deep philosophical stuff. Even critiqued some big names. In politics, I thought it was pretty bold for someone so young." The room fell silent for a split second before polite laughter rippled through the crowd. To most people, it sounded like a harmless anecdote. But for Candace, it felt like time slowed down. Her heart raced as she realized where this story might be heading. That niece Stallone was talking about. It couldn't be. Could it? She tried to maintain her composure, offering a tight-lipped smile while silently praying he wouldn't say anything more. But Stallone wasn't done yet. "Anyway," he continued, "this kid, he showed me some of her work once. And let me tell you, she didn't hold back. Criticized everyone, even folks she agreed with politically. Made me think twice about my own views." He chuckled, clearly amused by the memory. Candace's mind was spinning. She hadn't thought about those old writings in years. Back then, she was just a teenager trying to make sense of the world, scribbling her thoughts late at night in journals or typing them out on her family's ancient computer. It wasn't until much later, after she found her footing in conservative circles, that she distanced herself from those ideas. They belonged to a different version of her, a version she preferred to leave behind. Now, here was Sylvester Stallone, casually bringing it all back to life in front of hundreds of people, and millions more watching live on TV. Cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing every flicker of emotion. Was that panic flashing in her eyes or just surprise? No one could quite tell, but the internet certainly noticed. By the time the interview wrapped up, whispers were already spreading among the attendees. Some glanced at Candace curiously, wondering what Stallone's comments meant. Others pulled out their phones, searching for any trace of those mysterious teenage writings. Social media erupted within minutes, with hashtags like #CandaceTruth trending worldwide. Journalists scrambled to dig deeper, sensing they might be onto something explosive. Backstage, Candace moved quickly, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she retreated to a quiet corner. Her team huddled around her, faces tense with concern. "We need to get ahead of this," one of them muttered urgently. Phones buzzed nonstop as notifications poured in. Someone mentioned seeing screenshots of old blog posts circulating online. Another reported that a former classmate of hers claimed to remember reading similar critiques years ago. For the first time in a long while, Candace felt truly cornered. This wasn't just a minor scandal. It was a direct challenge to the narrative she had built around herself. She prided herself on being unapologetically authentic, yet now it seemed authenticity might betray her. As the reality of the situation sunk in, she knew one thing for sure: whatever happened next, it would change everything. The backstage chaos was palpable. Candace's team huddled around her like a protective shield, their voices overlapping as they tried to piece together a plan. "We need to shut this down before it gets worse," one of them urged, scrolling frantically through social media feeds. Another chimed in, "There's already talk about some blog posts. Someone's claiming they found the original account." Candace sat on a plush velvet couch, her hands gripping the edges tightly. Her mind raced faster than anyone else's in the room. She knew exactly what they were talking about, those old writings from years ago, buried deep in the recesses of her past. Back then she had been young, idealistic, and eager to question everything. Those essays were her way of processing the world, but they painted a very different picture of her beliefs compared to who she was today. Her assistant handed her a tablet, showing screenshots of tweets that had already gone viral. One read, "Remember when Candace Owens used to criticize conservatives? Hypocrisy exposed." Another showed side-by-side comparisons of quotes from her teenage writings and statements she'd made recently on TV. The captions mocked her for being inconsistent, accusing her of reinventing herself for fame and fortune. "This can't be happening," Candace muttered under her breath, shaking her head. For years she had worked tirelessly to build her reputation as a fearless voice for conservative values. Now, in a matter of hours, all of that seemed at risk of crumbling. Her team urged her to release a statement immediately, but she hesitated. A rushed response could make things worse. She needed time to think, to figure out how to spin this without losing credibility. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, the story was blowing up. Late-night talk show hosts joked about Sylvester Stallone's unexpected bombshell. One comedian quipped, "Who knew Rocky would throw the biggest punch of the night?" Memes flooded social media, with people photoshopping pictures of Candace, holding boxing gloves or standing next to a younger version of herself labeled Teenage Rebel. Backstage, Candace finally spoke up. "Okay, listen," she said firmly, silencing the chatter around her. "I'm not going to deny it. I did write those things. But you have to understand, I was a kid. People grow, they change, and I've always been open about my journey. This isn't hypocrisy, it's evolution." Her team nodded, scribbling notes furiously. They agreed that owning the narrative was the best approach. Within an hour, they drafted a carefully worded statement and posted it online. In it, Candace acknowledged her past writings, but framed them as part of her growth. "Like everyone, I've evolved over the years," she wrote. "My experiences shaped me into the person I am today, a proud advocate for common-sense policies that benefit us all." At first, the statement seemed to calm the storm slightly. Some supporters rallied behind her, praising her honesty and willingness to address the controversy head-on, but others weren't so easily convinced. Critics pounced on her explanation, pointing out inconsistencies between her current stance and her earlier criticisms. "If you believed those things back then, why didn't you say so publicly before?" one journalist asked during a follow-up interview request. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Donors who had previously supported her projects began pulling out. Advertisers distanced themselves from her podcast. Even some of her closest allies started questioning whether associating with her was worth the backlash. It felt like the walls were closing in, and for the first time, Candace questioned if she'd be able to recover. Amid the turmoil, Sylvester Stallone remained largely silent. When reporters reached out to him for comment, he simply shrugged and said, "I wasn't trying to stir anything up, just sharing a memory." To him, it was just another story from his colorful life. But for Candace, it was becoming a defining moment, one that threatened to overshadow everything she had worked for. Desperate to regain control, Candace decided to take matters into her own hands. She booked an appearance on a popular morning show, hoping to set the record straight once and for all. Sitting across from the host, she looked composed, wearing a tailored blazer and a confident smile. The host dove right in. asking pointed questions about her past writings and whether she regretted them. "I don't regret exploring ideas or challenging norms," Candace replied calmly. "But I do regret not addressing this sooner. I should have been upfront about my journey instead of letting others define it for me." The audience listened intently, some nodding along while others crossed their arms skeptically. As the interview progressed, the host pressed harder, asking why she hadn't corrected the public narrative earlier. That's when things took a turn. Candace paused mid-answer, her composure wavering. For a brief moment she looked lost, unsure of how to respond. Then, without another word, she stood up and walked off the set. The studio erupted in murmurs. Cameras followed her as she disappeared backstage, leaving the host stunned. "Well, that was unexpected," the host said awkwardly, turning back to the camera. Viewers at home were equally shocked. Social media exploded again, with debates raging about whether Candace had staged the walkout for attention or if she'd genuinely cracked under pressure. Behind the scenes, Candace locked herself in a dressing room, tears streaming down her face. For all her confidence and poise, she realized she wasn't invincible. The weight of the scandal had become too much to bear. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from friends, colleagues, and strangers alike. Some offered support, telling her to stay strong. Others criticized her actions, calling her a fraud and demanding accountability. In the days that followed, Candace retreated from the spotlight. She canceled appearances, deleted old social media posts, and focused on regrouping. Her team worked tirelessly to rebuild her image, brainstorming ways to reframe the narrative. Meanwhile, the internet continued to dissect every detail of her past, uncovering more fragments of her teenage writings and fueling further speculation. Though she was physically absent from the public eye, Candace couldn't escape the constant chatter. Late-night comedians roasted her walk-off, turning it into a recurring joke. Political analysts debated whether this marked the end of her career or simply a temporary setback. Supporters argued that everyone deserves a second chance, while detractors insisted she had brought this upon herself. Alone in her apartment one evening, Candace scrolled through her phone, reading endless headlines and comments. Some were cruel, mocking her for her perceived hypocrisy. Others were kinder, offering words of encouragement. As she stared at the screen, she realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the broader conversation, surrounding authenticity, redemption, and the cost of reinvention. Taking a deep breath, Candace closed her eyes and resolved to fight back, not by denying her past, but by embracing it. If she wanted to survive this storm, she would need to tell her full story, warts and all. Only then could she hope to win back trust and prove that people are capable of change. The days after Candace's dramatic walk-off from the morning show felt like a blur. She spent most of her time holed up in her apartment, avoiding the outside world as much as possible. The media frenzy surrounding her had reached fever pitch, and every corner of the internet seemed to have an opinion about her. Some called her a coward for walking out. Others saw it as a sign of vulnerability, proof that she was human after all. But no matter how people spun it, one thing was clear. Candace Owens's carefully constructed image was cracking under the pressure. Her team tried their best to keep things together, but even they were struggling. Phone calls with sponsors went unanswered. Collaborations fell through. Even some of her closest allies began distancing themselves, unsure of whether aligning with her right now was worth the risk. It wasn't just professional relationships that suffered, personal ones did too. Friends who had always been supportive started pulling away, either because they didn't know what to say or because they didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. Candace knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. Hiding might have bought her a little time, but it wouldn't solve anything. Sooner or later, she'd have to face the music or risk losing everything she had worked so hard to build. Late at night, when the city outside her window was quiet, she sat alone in her living room, staring at the blank TV screen. Her mind raced with questions. What should she do next? How could she possibly fix this mess? And maybe the hardest question of all, was redemption even possible? One evening, while scrolling through old photos on her phone, she stumbled across a picture of herself as a teenager. In the photo, she was sitting at a desk cluttered with books and papers, wearing oversized glasses and a wide grin. Back then, life had seemed so simple. She was full of curiosity, eager to explore ideas without worrying about consequences. Looking at that younger version of herself, Candace felt a strange mix of emotions: nostalgia, regret, and maybe even a bit of pride. That girl hadn't been afraid to ask tough questions or challenge the status quo. Maybe there was something to learn from her after all. The next morning, Candace made a decision. Instead of running away from her past, she would confront it head-on. She called her team and told them she wanted to release a video, not another polished statement, but a raw, unfiltered message directly to her audience. At first, her advisors balked. "Are you sure this is the right move?" one of them asked cautiously. "People are already tearing you apart. This could make things worse." But Candace shook her head. "I don't care anymore," she said firmly. "If I'm going down being honest." With that, she locked herself in her home office and hit record. In the video, Candace spoke candidly about her teenage years, the confusion, the idealism, the hunger to understand the world around her. She admitted that the writings Sylvester Stallone mentioned weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a larger body of work she had poured her heart into during those formative years. "Back then, I thought I had all the answers," she confessed, her voice tinged with both humor and sadness. "Looking back, I realize how naive I was. But isn't that what growing up is all about? Figuring out who you are, and sometimes realizing you were wrong?" She went on to explain how her views had shifted over time, shaped by experiences, relationships, and new information. "I'm not the same person I was at 16, she said, "and thank God for that. If we're not allowed to change to grow, then what's the point of anything?" She ended the video with a plea for understanding, acknowledging that trust takes time to rebuild, but promising to earn it back one step at a time. When the video dropped online, reactions were mixed. Some viewers praised her honesty, saying it took courage to admit her flaws. Others remained skeptical, accusing her of using emotional manipulation to win sympathy. Despite the divided response, one thing was undeniable: the video sparked a conversation. People began sharing their own stories of changing beliefs, of moments when they realized they had been wrong about something important. For the first time, since the scandal broke, Candace felt like she was starting to regain control of the narrative. Still, the road ahead wasn't easy. Critics continued to dig into her past, uncovering more essays and blog posts she had written as a young adult. Each new revelation reignited the debate, forcing her to defend herself again and again. But instead of retreating, Candace leaned into the scrutiny. She appeared on podcasts and panels, engaging in thoughtful discussions about the nature of growth and accountability. Slowly but surely, she began to win back some of the trust she had lost. Not everyone forgave her, of course. Some former fans refused to support her again, feeling betrayed by what they saw as hypocrisy. Others, however, admired her willingness to confront her mistakes and applauded her efforts to evolve. Among them was a small but vocal group of supporters who rallied behind her, organizing campaigns to promote her work and counteract negative press. As weeks turned into months, Candace noticed a shift, not just in public perception, but within herself. The experience had humbled her in ways she never expected. She realized that being authentic didn't mean having all the answers or presenting a perfect image. It meant embracing imperfection, owning your past, and committing to growth, even when it was uncomfortable. One day, while flipping through channels, she stumbled upon an interview with Sylvester Stallone. He was promoting a new project, and the host brought up the infamous charity gala incident. "Do you regret mentioning that story about Candace Owens?" the host asked casually. Stallone shrugged, his trademark smirk spreading across his face. "Regret? Nah, I just shared a memory. Truth has a way of coming out eventually, doesn't it? Besides," he added with a chuckle, "if anything, it gave her a chance to show people who she really is." Candace paused the TV, letting his words sink in. For all the chaos he had inadvertently caused, Stallone had a point. The scandal had forced her to confront parts of herself she had long buried. It had tested her resilience and reminded her of the importance of staying true to who she was, flaws and all. With renewed determination, Candace threw herself into her work. She launched a new initiative aimed at fostering open dialogue about controversial topics, inviting guests from across the political spectrum to share their perspectives. She also started writing again, not the fiery op-eds she was known for, but reflective pieces exploring themes of identity, growth, and redemption. To her surprise, these articles resonated deeply with readers, many of whom thanked her for addressing issues they had struggled with themselves. Though the scars of the scandal remained, Candace emerged stronger and wiser. She had learned that authenticity wasn't about perfection, it was about vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to keep moving forward, even when the odds were stacked against you. And as she looked toward the future, she knew one thing for certain. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them head-on. Months had passed since the scandal first erupted, and while life for Candace Owens was far from back to normal, she was starting to find a rhythm again. The initial storm had died down, replaced by a steady hum of background noise. Critics still jabbed at her whenever they could, but their voices carried less weight now. Her supporters, on the other hand, were growing louder, rallying behind her with renewed energy. They saw her resilience as proof that she wasn't just another public figure crumbling under pressure. She was someone willing to fight for redemption. But redemption didn't come easy. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong step, one ill-timed comment, and the fragile trust she was rebuilding could shatter all over again. So Candace treaded carefully, choosing her words with precision and focusing on actions rather than empty promises. She poured herself into her new initiative, a platform designed to encourage honest conversations about polarizing topics. It wasn't flashy or glamorous, but it gave her purpose, something solid to hold on to during uncertain times. The project started small, almost experimental. She hosted live discussions online, inviting guests from diverse backgrounds to share their perspectives. Some of these guests were people she fundamentally disagreed with, but that was the point. She wanted to show the world, and maybe even herself, that meaningful dialogue was possible even when opinions clashed. At first, skeptics dismissed the effort as a PR stunt. She's just trying to clean up her image, they said. But as the weeks went by, something unexpected happened. People began listening. One particularly memorable session stood out. A guest who identified as progressive joined the discussion, openly criticizing some of Candace's past positions. Instead of shutting him down or getting defensive, Candace leaned in, asking thoughtful follow-up questions. She didn't try to convince him he was wrong. Instead, she focused on understanding where he was coming from. By the end of the conversation, both sides admitted they had learned something new. Viewers flooded the comments section afterward, praising the exchange as refreshing and rare in today's divisive climate. Word spread quickly, and soon the sessions gained traction. More people tuned in, eager to see how Candace would handle tough questions or navigate disagreements. Media outlets picked up on the trend, running stories about her unlikely pivot toward fostering unity. Even some of her former detractors grudgingly acknowledged that she seemed sincere this time around. "Maybe she's not the same person we thought she was," one columnist wrote. "Or maybe she's finally figured out what authenticity actually means." Still, not everyone was convinced. Critics argued that her efforts were too little, too late. They pointed to her earlier controversies and accused her of using the platform to whitewash her reputation. Others claimed she was simply capitalizing on the current cultural moment, riding the wave of calls for civility without truly committing to change. These accusations stung, but Candace refused to let them derail her progress. She knew she couldn't please everyone, and honestly, she didn't want to. What mattered most was staying true to the values she had come to embrace: growth, honesty, and a willingness to listen. As the project grew, so did its impact. Schools began reaching out. asking if they could use clips from the discussions in classrooms to teach students about respectful debate. Community organizations invited her to speak at events, hoping to spark similar dialogues within their own groups. Candace embraced every opportunity, traveling across the country to meet people face to face. She sat in living rooms, community centers, and school auditoriums, engaging with ordinary folks who had real concerns and real stories to tell. These interactions reminded her why she had gotten into this line of work in the first place. Politics wasn't just about policies or ideologies. It was about people. And people were messy, complicated, and beautiful all at once. Listening to their struggles and triumphs reignited a passion in her that had been dulled by years of controversy and criticism. For the first time in ages, she felt like she was making a difference, not through grand gestures or viral sound bites, but through quiet, consistent effort. Back home, though, the challenges remained. Financially, things were tighter than ever. With advertisers pulling out and donors hesitant to commit, funding for her projects became a constant worry. Her team worked tirelessly to secure sponsorships and grants, but it was an uphill battle. Still, Candace refused to cut corners or compromise her vision. If anything, the financial strain only strengthened her resolve. "If I can make this work despite everything," she told her team during one particularly tense meeting, "then it'll prove that this isn't just about money or fame. It's about doing something real." Her perseverance paid off in unexpected ways. One evening, while scrolling through emails, Candace stumbled upon a message from an old acquaintance, a philanthropist who had quietly admired her recent efforts. The email was brief but impactful. "I believe in what you're doing. Let me know how I can help." Attached was a generous donation offer, enough to keep the project afloat for several more months. Tears welled up in her eyes as she read it. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel hope. Not just for her career, but for the future of the work she cared so deeply about. With newfound stability, Candace doubled down on her goals. She expanded the scope of her discussions, tackling issues like mental health, economic inequality, and systemic racism. She also made a conscious effort to amplify voices that often went unheard, inviting grassroots activists, educators, and everyday citizens to share their experiences. These segments resonated deeply with audiences, sparking conversations that extended far beyond the confines of her platform. Behind the scenes, however, the scars of the scandal lingered. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of the day settled in, Candace sometimes found herself replaying those chaotic weeks in her mind. The panic, the shame, the fear of losing everything. It all felt so raw, even months later. But instead of letting those memories drag her down, she used them as fuel. Each sleepless night became a reminder of how far she had come and how much further she still wanted to go. One evening, while preparing for an upcoming discussion, she received a call from an unknown number. Hesitant but curious, she answered. On the other end was Sylvester Stallone. His voice was warm and familiar, carrying the same charm that had captivated audiences for decades. "Hey there," he said casually. "Just wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" Candace laughed softly, caught off guard by the unexpected call. "Honestly, better than I thought I would be," she replied. "It hasn't been easy, but I think I'm finally figuring things out," Stallone chuckled. "That's good to hear. You know, I've been thinking a lot about that night at the gala. Didn't mean to stir the pot, but, well, sometimes life has a funny way of pushing us toward growth, doesn't it?" His words struck a chord. For so long, Candace had viewed his offhand comment as the catalyst for her downfall. But now, hearing him frame it as a moment of potential growth, she realized he was right. Without that incident, she might never have confronted her past or discovered the strength to rebuild her life. "You're probably right," she admitted. "Thanks for calling, by the way. It means a lot." After hanging up, Candace sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on the journey she had been through. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles she couldn't predict. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Because no matter what happened, she knew one thing for sure. She was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. Months turned into a year, and Candace Owens found herself standing on a stage she never thought she'd occupy again, at least not in this way. It wasn't the polished, high-stakes environment of a political rally or a primetime TV interview. Instead, it was a modest community center in a small town, packed with locals who had come to hear her speak. The room buzzed with anticipation as she adjusted the microphone and scanned the crowd. There were no flashy lights, no cameras rolling, just people eager to listen. She took a deep breath before beginning. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, her voice steady but warm. "This past year has taught me so much about what really matters, not headlines, not social media likes, but connection. Real, honest connection." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And that's why I'm here today, to share my story, not because I think it's perfect, but because it's real." Her speech that evening was raw and unfiltered, a culmination of everything she had learned since the scandal broke. She talked about the mistakes she had made, the moments of doubt that had nearly broken her, and the lessons she had gleaned from facing her own vulnerabilities. She admitted that she hadn't always been proud of who she was, but she was determined to be better moving forward. "Growth isn't linear," she told the audience. "It's messy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright painful. But if we're willing to embrace it, it can transform us in ways we never imagined." The applause that followed was thunderous, genuine. People lined up afterward to thank her, some sharing their own struggles and others simply expressing gratitude for her honesty. As she shook hands and posed for photos, Candace felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the fleeting kind that comes from external validation, but the deeper, quieter kind that stems from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Back home, life continued to evolve. Her initiative had grown beyond anything she could have anticipated, expanding into workshops, online courses, and even partnerships with schools and nonprofits. What started as a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation had blossomed into something far greater, a movement focused on fostering understanding across divides. Critics still existed, of course, but their voices carried less weight now. The people who mattered, the ones engaged in meaningful dialogue, were too busy building bridges to care about tearing her down. One day, while reviewing footage from a recent workshop, Candace received an email notification. It was from a major streaming platform, offering her the opportunity to create a documentary series based on her journey. At first, she hesitated. A part of her worried it might feel like exploitation, another attempt to capitalize on controversy. But as she read through the proposal, she realized it wasn't about sensationalizing her past. It was about exploring universal themes of identity, growth, and resilience. If done right, it could inspire others to confront their own truths and embrace change. She accepted the offer and dove headfirst into production. The series, titled Behind the Persona, delved into the complexities of reinvention, not just hers, but also those of everyday individuals navigating similar challenges. Each episode featured interviews with people from different walks of life: a former soldier adjusting to civilian life, a teacher redefining her purpose after burnout, a young artist grappling with self-doubt. Through their stories, Candace hoped to show viewers that transformation is possible no matter where you start. Filming wasn't easy. Some days, old wounds resurfaced as she revisited painful memories. Other times, technical issues or scheduling conflicts threatened to derail progress. But through it all, Candace remained committed, driven by the belief that this project could make a difference. When the final cut was complete, she watched it alone in her living room, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she saw her journey not as a series of failures and missteps, but as a testament to the power of perseverance. The premiere night arrived, and Candace stood nervously backstage as the audience filed in. This time, there were no gala dresses or red carpets, just a simple screening at a local theater. As the lights dimmed and the opening scene unfolded, she held her breath, unsure how people would react. But when the credits rolled and the crowd erupted into applause. She knew they had struck a chord. Afterward, during the Q&A session, someone asked her a question that stopped her in her tracks. "Do you regret any of it?" the person asked. "The scandal, the fallout, all of it?" Candace smiled softly, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "Regret implies wishing things had been different," she replied. "And honestly, don't wish anything were different. Sure, there are moments I'd rather forget, but without them I wouldn't be sitting here today, doing this work, telling this story. So no, I don't regret it. I see it as part of my journey, a chapter that shaped me in ways I couldn't have predicted." As the event wrapped up, Sylvester Stallone sent her a text. "Just watched the premiere. Incredible job," it read. "Sometimes truth finds its way out when we least expect it. Glad you let it lead you somewhere meaningful." His message brought a smile to her face. In a strange way, his offhand comment at the charity gala had set everything in motion. It had forced her to confront parts of herself she had long ignored, ultimately leading her to a place of authenticity and purpose. Without him, she might never have taken the steps necessary to rebuild her life. In the weeks that followed, behind the persona gained traction, earning praise from critics and audiences alike. Viewers connected with its message of growth and redemption, finding solace in the idea that everyone has the capacity to change. Schools began incorporating episodes into their curriculums, using them as tools to teach empathy and resilience. Community leaders reached out, asking for guidance on hosting similar discussions in their own neighborhoods. Candace traveled extensively, meeting people whose lives had been touched by the series and hearing their stories firsthand. Through it all, she remained grounded, refusing to let success inflate her ego. She knew how quickly fortunes could shift, how fragile reputations could be. More importantly, she understood that true fulfillment came not from accolades or achievements, but from making a positive impact. And in that regard, she felt richer than ever. On a quiet afternoon months later, Candace sat in her backyard, sipping tea and watching the leaves sway in the breeze. Her phone buzzed occasionally with messages from colleagues or fans, but she ignored it, savoring the stillness. Life wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was good. She had weathered storms, faced her demons, and emerged stronger on the other side. As she reflected on everything she had been through, one thought kept coming back to her: the importance of embracing who you truly are, flaws and all. Society often pressures people to present polished versions of themselves, hiding anything that might invite criticism. But Candace had learned that authenticity was far more powerful than perfection. By owning her past and committing to growth, she had not only rebuilt her life but also inspired others to do the same. With a contented sigh, she leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes against the golden sunlight. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, not as the person she used to be, but as the person she had become. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.